What's going on, folks? Thanks for hitting that download button and checking out a brand new episode of Toys and Tech of the Trade, your one-stop shop for toys, tech, and talk with some assembly required. I'm your host, Rich, and if this is the first time you're checking out an episode, first of all, welcome. Second, a bit about what we do here. Toys and Tech of the Trade is an interview series where we sit down with content creators, entrepreneurs, and awesome folks that are on our radar and discuss the gadgets, the gear, and the tech that they use to run their business, create their content, and overall be more productive. Now, when it comes to toys, we like to say toys in quotes just because you'd be surprised what people consider their toys. It could be something as simple as I always reference guitar picks because I actually know somebody that collects guitar picks, jet skis, cars, action figures, you name it. Everybody's definition of toys is just a little bit different than ours. So we like to embrace it in a more general sense. It allows us to not only share a different facet of our guests, but it also just allows us to connect with them on a different level and break up some of the business and tech and gadget talk. So with that intro out of the way, let's get into some housekeeping and turn it over to this week's guest. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone who checked out our Q&A episode. Definitely just a really great turnout in terms of downloads, et cetera, especially just because we were off for quite some time. And also a lot of people reached out giving me words of encouragement with regards to what's going on personally, obviously, not working, all the fun stuff that comes with it, et cetera. I'm not going to bog you guys down with it, but I truly appreciate all the kind words and well wishes, and of course more people sending questions for future Q&A episodes. I truly appreciate that stuff as well. A couple of other things, obviously if you're downloading this episode on Saturday, September 18th, we are moving our release schedule from Wednesdays to Saturdays, primarily because it's going to be easier to do editing. And now with my little girl starting school, it's it's going to be a little bit more difficult to just get the edits in the middle of the week, just because picking her up from school, playing doting dad. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And the one thing I will say though is that I will be opening up my calendar to actually be able to interview more guests. Now that my little girl's going to school, I will have more weekday hours to get guest interviews in. So if you're interested in being a guest on a future episode of Toys and Tech of the Trade, definitely feel free to email me, rich@rageworks.net. And you can also check the show notes for this episode, and I'll put a link to our booking calendar if you are interested in being a guest. But definitely really excited about what's on deck now that we're moving Toys and Tech of the Trade to the weekend, only because it's, like I said, just easier to edit. A lot of our shows have a release schedule that pretty much covers the entire week. Our Wednesday release schedule usually would coincide with Turnbuckle Tabloid, but now they have their Wednesday episode dropping, then Trek Untold Thursday. Fridays usually Black is the New Black Friday or Saturday, and then Sundays, of course, it's the Eat for Life podcast, and then some of the other shows on the network are mixed in between, but they don't really have a set release schedule versus the other shows. But I think it's going to be more productive for just getting the shows out quicker, getting more guests on board, and also focusing on some of the stuff that people have been asking for, like the gift guides and stuff like that. We were going to do a back to school gift guide, and I may still do that only because in some parts of the country, school is just getting started. So there might be some good recommendations in there for some of my fellow creators that are going back to school. Because again, podcasting isn't just an older person's game. There are a lot of young folks that are really going out there and knocking it out of the box in the podcasting space. So if I can share some guidance and some info that can help them out and get them some awesome gear, I will definitely do that. The only other bit of housekeeping is I know some people had signed up for the RageWorks newsletter, and some people were like, oh, are you not sending them? I'm being very respectful of people's time, and I don't want to just clog your inbox with a newsletter like, hey, still here. These are the shows that came out this week. I mean, we do a pretty good job of outreach on social media currently, that we don't want to rely on the newsletter as just a point to tell people about new episodes. We're pretty consistent with that between the Rageworks network, Rageworks regular social media, plus the individual hosts getting out their content. I don't want to have a newsletter strictly just regurgitating the same thing that you can see if you follow us on social. But if you are interested in getting the newsletter, definitely feel free to sign up. We're going to start just leveraging it a little differently, letting newsletter subscribers get access to contests and things first. I got a lot of stuff here in the Rageworks studio, a lot of prizes. Definitely would love to find them homes and get them to some great listeners and great fans. So be on the lookout for some contests in the future. All right, let's keep this housekeeping short and sweet and turn it over to this week's guest, which just has an amazing story and so many awesome things that I'm a fan of got addressed in this episode, and I want to share it with you. So without any further ado, let's turn it over to this week's guest and learn about the toys and tech of their trade. My guest this week is Tim Baradas, co-host of the Fight Insight podcast, Toronto's #1 combat sports podcast. And the funny thing about my connection to Tim is that it comes through, again, podcasting, and then we discover a familiarity with MMA and a love for the sport. And next thing you know, we're exchanging messages on LinkedIn, and Tim is here to share his toys and tech of the trade. Tim, what's going on, my friend?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, very, very excited to actually sit down and not only talk with a fellow podcaster, but also a fellow MMA fan and martial artist. I think that there's a lot of parallels in our story. I mean, there's even parallels to our LinkedIn connections. I saw an organization you work for in the insurance industry that actually used to be a partner for a company I work for. So crazy. Yeah, it's just a small world. So it is. Let's jump right into the deep end of the pool. You co-host the Fight Insight podcast alongside your co-host Prince. You guys have been, as of the recording of this episode, you guys got 26 episodes in the books. Yep. Recently closed a collab with Filipino TV, popped up on FTV Sports Weekly. You've had an impressive list of guests, UFC fighters, notable names like Ashley Evans Smith, Raquel Pennington. You're also an MMA practitioner yourself. So there's a lot to unpack. So I want to kind of get into the origin story of how it all started. So let's talk about podcasting and what got you into wanting to do an MMA podcast, especially because it's a very crowded space, especially because everybody wants to have not only an MMA podcast, but also so many fighters and notable personalities in the industry are also getting into the space.
Yeah, it's difficult. At the time that we started it, it was mid-pandemic, and gyms were closed. I'm living up in Toronto, Canada. There was nothing going on. You try to keep up your workouts virtually, which is, I don't know, for me, impossible, right? I couldn't do it. It was killing me to try to, work out with someone across Zoom. Kudos to you guys if you can. But, just trying to figure out something to do and keep me busy. And a friend of mine and I, a guy that trained at my gym with me up here, we're talking about potentially doing a podcast. We were working it out, figuring out the ins and outs of what we were going to do, how we were going to do it. And then his DJ career took off. He started producing music and releasing music, and it started to go. And he said, look, Tim, I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to put in the time and dedication that I want to. And then turns out my buddy Prince, who I had known for a long time, also training at the gym, he was looking to do something. And we started talking, and we launched it in February of 2021. We, took a long time to figure out how to run it, the name. I'll tell you, figuring out the name oh my goodness, that probably was one of the longest things. We went through 1,000 iterations of names. We've gone through a couple of designs on the logo, the content that we produce, finding the guests and things like that. I know we'll talk about it, but really it was a cure for boredom. If I'm going to be honest, it was taking a passion and trying to figure out something to do during this pandemic that we wanted to create and engage in, and the time that it takes, to any of these podcasters out there, to any people wanting to do podcasting, congratulations to you, and all the power to you, because this thing takes a lot of work. We did not know that going in, Rich. I'll tell you, we had no idea.
It's an interesting way that you've explained that, and I kind of want to go back to your decision to start it, which was obviously the pandemic, wanting to keep your mind occupied. And I want to start there. Was there ever an intention of wanting to get into podcasting prior to the pandemic? Is it something you kicked around, or was it more so because you wanted to create and keep yourself sharp?
Yeah, it was prior to pandemic. I had been training, like you said, in mixed martial arts. So I was doing boxing, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, strength and conditioning. And I was probably at my gym, 5 days a week. Back, if someone was having a training camp or something like that, I'd be in there 7 days a week, helping them train, helping them run, keeping them company, being a punching bag, whatever I had to do to help my teammates out. When the pandemic started, you lose all that time, you lose all that engagement, and we were kind of stuck doing nothing. In terms of creating a podcast, no, it wasn't really ever in my sights as something to do. I actually came about it, and this is another area where we kind of cross paths. There's a local comic book store that I had been frequenting. It's called Heroes World. It's out in Markham, Ontario. It's a great shop, small shop run by a couple of guys around my age. They got into it right after university, I believe is the story. And their shop has been up now for 20 years this year. They had always kind of had a small podcast going on. It was quite small, not really anything. But as the pandemic began and their store shut down, just temporarily closed, they began to pump out the podcast and get a little bit more engaged, and started to go more outside of just the comic book realm, but started to do, movies and TV and just anything that would engage their public and engage their customers and kind of reach out to people. And they had reached out to me to kind of come on and guest on their podcast a few times. And that's where I got the bug. I started to get into it, started to enjoy the preparation for it, thinking, hey, look, I'm going to be on this podcast. I'm going to be out there, maybe dozens of people will see it, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands. I don't know, but I don't want to look like a fool, So I would prep and I would make notes and get ready for the podcast. And all that is what really spurred me to say, hey, look, I want to do something on my own. I really started to enjoy it, started to enjoy the preparation, the creation, thinking about what I would do, and then listening to it back and enjoying what I said, but then seeing where I could have done better. And that was where I started to say, you know what, I want to create my own, and I want to be able to have even more control over the topics or the way we present or the guests that we have on. And that's where kind of it led on to the Fight Insight podcast. It's
an interesting process. And I liked one thing that you said, and I kind of I want to go into that a little further. It's the fact that you wanted to look good, whether it was listened to by 5 people, 500 people, 5,000 people. And It's one of those things that a lot of people that start podcasting, they're always like, if the equipment isn't good, etc., people will still listen because, whatever, I'm an engaging personality. And that can only take you but so far. And the thing about it is that people they get romanticized by the Joe Rogans and the Mark Marons and all of these other amazing podcasters that are out there that have made it in this business. And the thing about it is, to your point, it takes a lot of work to get noticed. And it also takes a lot of work, especially if you're trying to get noticed in a space that is as crowded as the podcasting space is, because what ends up happening is people want to know what makes you so special that they want to invest an hour, 90 minutes, etc., into enjoying and absorbing your product. And in your case, your guest spot on that podcast that Heroes World was running is a great trial by fire, because here you have a podcast that's in an amazingly crowded niche, but it works because you have a local element. You have a comic book store, like a brick and mortar background behind it. So those hosts can speak to the podcast community a little differently about their experiences, and also tie it into anything that's going on in the comic book world, especially during the pandemic where things were really weird.
Oh yeah.
Now, with that said, your preparation, and that's one of the things I've enjoyed as I was researching our interview, was the fact that you would think that you and Prince had been doing this podcast for a few years, based on the fact, you guys have good mic technique. You came out of the gate with your graphics were top notch. How important, and we'll get into especially the naming aspect. What were some of the headaches you endured in preparation to launching the show?
Well, the name was a big one. So finding a name, and I was researching online. Prince and I were both researching online to try and figure out, like, what's in a name? What do you need to have in your name? And so we were both born on February 22nd. And so for a long time, Prince was like, we got to name it February 22nd. And I'm like, that has nothing to do with our topic. And it has, although it is so cute, and although it has like a story behind it, it's not going to snag people
right
to come in and look at our podcast. And when you look at how you're going to name your podcast, it has to be something where people understand what you're talking about right off the bat, or it should. It should be something catchy enough that it might hook them. And it's something that another thing I learned was, you have to say the name over and over in your head, over and over out loud, to the point where you get sick of saying it, but to the point where you can understand, does this name sound good? Phonetically speaking, does it have the right tempo? Does it have whatever? So you want to be able to say it. And if I say it out loud, will people understand the words I am saying? Will they understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? Because if you say to someone across the street, hey, follow my podcast, it's Fight Insight Podcast, will they say Bite and Might Podcast? Like, will they be able to understand what you're saying? Is it words that mumble together? So, and a little side story, the naming actually ended up coming out of, and again, another link that you and I have, is it came from a wrestling website that I used to run back in the late 90s. I was running a website back when I had to create my website using HTML coding.
Man,
for anybody old enough to understand what that is, I was going into Notepad and writing code. It was from a class I took in university at the time, and I was learning how to do a website. And I actually ran a wrestling website for about 7 years. And it was before WWF and WCW even had a website. And it was called Hollywood's Wrestling Insight. And the play was on the word insight, because it was like thoughtful insight, but then also was like a cool website,
Right.
So came up with the name Fight Insight. That was, going back to your question, that was probably the biggest challenge in getting it started. In terms of, running it and doing it, again, thanks to Heroes World, I leveraged what they were doing. They're using a program called StreamYard. I'm sure you know about it.
Yep.
That's how we're doing that. And I'll just say another challenge was the logo. I really appreciate that you're saying you like all those things. It wasn't right off the bat. We kind of launched with a really crappy logo that I did in Microsoft Paint.
Of course. That's how you got to do it, though. I mean, not to derail it, but I want to preface to everyone, like, Tim just did something that I always tell people not to get caught up in, and he didn't, which is, the paralysis analysis of, oh, my logo's not 100%. This isn't 100%. He went and he pulled the trigger and he got the ball rolling. And that was more important, because a logo, to Tim's point, you could change it down the road. You can improve your mic. You can improve your equipment. You can improve your presentation, but you can't improve any of that if you haven't even started it.
You know what? That is excellent advice. And I think that really is it, because what happened was, once we had the name, like, I would say probably changing your name midway may not be the best. I don't know how you feel about that, but once we had the name, we thought, okay, we can do this. And what we did was, I had the program. I knew how I was going to, technically record it and how to put it out into the world. But once we had the name, we said, okay, and we did our first episode, and we said, okay, let's do this kind of as a demo. Let's see how our play off of each other works, how our conversation flows and things like that. And we did the first episode, and we really enjoyed it. And we thought, oh man, this is good. Like, it has something. Now, Prince and I had been friends for maybe 5 years or so, and had spent lots of time together in training camps and things like that. So we kind of knew we had a good relationship, and we had a good back and forth that we thought might translate onto recording or onto a podcast. But we said, okay, well, we don't know how it's going to be when we're actually doing it, the pressure and stuff like that. But once we did that first podcast, we actually then said, you know what, screw it. Why keep practicing? Let's just put it out there.
Yep.
And so we just went with it. And you're right. We didn't have the logo. We didn't have the background and stuff like that. I was using at the time, I think, just my regular iPhone wired headset, right? Like, I had no fancy mic, no fancy setup, anything like that. And actually, if you go back to watch our podcast from the beginning till now, you will see a difference in the quality and the sound, as we ended up getting some Yeti microphones and stuff like that, got some ring lights, changed our backgrounds, but we're continually trying to change, and continually trying to improve. But I really agree with you there. I think, like, once you want to do it, and I would say once you have your name, then go ahead and start, because it's the practice. It's the practice of doing it and getting better. You're not going to get better by thinking about it. You're going to get better by doing it.
Absolutely. And I think that that's the biggest part of it. And more importantly, I also respect the fact that you and Prince went out there, and you kind of just went into the pool, so to speak, with all of these other podcasts, but you went out of your way to make yourselves sound unique. It's always one of those things where people, they'll create their content based around content they enjoy, to the point where sometimes imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And that's great, but it doesn't become uniquely you. And I think that was really something that stood out, especially in your episode with Ashley Evans Smith. Given her content, how she presents her content, you worked around making your show friendly to your audience while still being respectful to her audience.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That really was one of our favorite episodes. And, if you're new to us and you want to check out Fight Insight Podcast, I definitely would recommend that episode with Ashley Evans Smith. For those that don't know her, she's a UFC MMA fighter. She's out of California, but she has a fantastic podcast called Sex and Violence with Rebel Girl. And she's found an incredible niche where, we say it on the podcast, but she's kind of like a Howard Stern meets Joe Rogan, because she gets her guests on, they talk about fighting, but then she flips the script and just talks about sex.
Yep.
Right? Very openly. And the guests, I mean, I can't believe some of the guests that she has, what they're willing to say and what they're willing to talk about. But yeah, when we had her on, we knew that she had that, if you want to say taboo topic, right? But, or a risque topic, but, we welcome it, right? Like, talk about it, talk about what you want and how you want to say things. And, we kept it somewhat controlled, and we did a little play on some of the words and things like that she does. But no, it was good. And we think that one came out really well. But for all our guests, we want to be able to have them on and let them talk as they want to. We always say to our guests, is there anything that you want to get out? Is there any message that you want to say? And then on the flip to that, is there anything that you don't want to talk about? Because we always want to be respectful to them. I don't want to ask them a question that leads them into something that they don't want to engage in.
Right.
And another thing I'll say about guests is, we were hesitant to have guests on. We knew we wanted to, but we kind of felt like, well, we didn't want to ask guests to come on when we didn't have an audience, or when we thought that they might come on and say, "Ooh, like you guys are way too small," or anything, right?
Right.
But we started asking, and people started saying yes. And one small story is there's a UFC fighter. He's out of Tennessee now, I believe. It's Brian Bam Bam Barberena.
Right.
You know, huge fighter, 3-time Fight of the Night winner, great guy. I've kind of been like an Instagram friend of his for like probably 4 years, and we've actually shared messages back and forth. And when I started thinking about the podcast, I said, "Man, Bam Bam is a guy I want to have on." And right from the get-go, before we even launched, he said, "Of course I'll come on your podcast, Tim. Don't worry about it." And that meant so much to me. And so we're going through our podcast, and I don't invite him because I'm like, I don't want to have him on until I have more viewers. I don't want to have him on until I have more subscribers. And at one point I messaged him and I just said, "Hey, we're still going, but I'm just waiting till we get a little bit better or get a little bit more, popular." And he messaged back, and I will never forget this and appreciate him for saying this. He goes, "Tim, I don't care whether you have 5 listeners or 5,000 listeners. I'll come on to support you, and I'll come on again." And that day I was like, "Okay, man, let's bring you on next week," because I appreciated that so much. And sure enough, he has come on twice, and he'll come on again. And he's a great guy. But just someone saying that to us was so appreciative and thankful for that, because you're like, wow, there are some people that will come out and help you. They don't care about necessarily the publicity or whatever. They just want to come out to help people, and they want to just come out and have a good time. And that's what we try to give people.
Yeah, the internet's a weird place, for as vicious as it can be. There's a lot of genuinely good people out there, especially when you're launching certain endeavors and you've never met these people in real life, or you've never connected with them. It's something I stress often, especially when it comes to a medium like podcasting, where you got to create consistency, because your voice may get that person through their 30 minutes in traffic. Your voice may get that person through a tough spot. Your voice may get that person to chuckle, to have a laugh to themselves when they're not in the best of places. I think that especially with the pandemic and podcasting really picking up steam, part of it is because people wanted to create, but I also think that part of it was because people needed a mental health outlet. And especially as someone who covers the fight game, it's as much mental as it is physical. You can be defeated mentally before you even set foot in the octagon or the cage or the ring. And so many creators, they get caught up in that, because it's like, hey, you're the most popular kid in your town, and then you go to a college in a big city and you're just, number 7,000 on the Rolodex of the university where you're at. So to hear that, and to hear somebody give you that word of encouragement, it's huge, because it not only gave you a great guess, but it motivated you to keep going and gave you a support system that was organic within a field that you were comfortable in.
Yeah, definitely. It encouraged me moving forward to say, yeah, let's just reach out to people and see. Let's not be hesitant. Let's not belittle our own podcast, right? I think sometimes I will say that, and Rich, when we were on one of our LinkedIn groups chats, I remember someone made a comment to me on something saying, "Hey, I noticed that when you talk about your podcast, you say, 'Oh, we're just a small podcast. Oh, we're just new. Oh, we have small viewership.'" And I probably did say that without meaning anything derogatory to myself or to my.
Oh yeah, of course.
I'm saying it just to be honest, because I thought sometimes, if I was going to ask a guest, I would say, "Oh, would you like to come on our small podcast?" And people have told me and given me the advice to say, don't say that.
I agree.
Just say, "Would you like to come on the podcast?" Don't belittle your podcast. Now, during my podcast, I will use, dry humor and stuff and go, "Oh, I can't believe you came on this podcast." But that's more as a joke.
Of course. No, that's right. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's a big hurdle for many of us. I mean, I was in the same boat when I started my MMA and wrestling podcast years ago, and I'd be like, "Hey, you want to come on and the small show or this or that," and after a while I just kind of removed that, and I'm like, "Listen, I got this podcast. We're here in New York. We got a massive hub of sports, etc. And then you just got to work on refining your pitch by removing the limitation of what you feel your audience should be to that particular guest.
Right.
If your pitch is good, it's good,
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, so removing that from your speech and taking that away, because you know what, it's almost like fake it till you make it. You know what I mean? Like, just say, hey, I'm a podcast. I know someone had told me the stat before to say that most podcasts, or whatever it is, like 80% or 90% of podcasts don't make it past episode 10.
I agree.
Something like that. There's some sort of stat like that says that, there's this burnout that happens and people just die off. And so as we then surpassed episode 10, and now, like you said at the beginning, we're at episode 26, 27, and we keep going. And really, there's no end in sight. Like, I've got potential guest book now for the next like 2-3 months already. Like, we're feeling good. We know we're kind of in our groove. At this point, yeah, I get it. And I get that, commentary, or I get that critique to say, like, stop saying that you're small, stop saying whatever. You're doing it.
Yep.
Whether or not people are finding you and all that, hey, you'll work on that. You'll grow that. You'll keep, publicizing yourself, or you're getting your name out there. It will happen. Just go with it and go with the flow. And so I really appreciate whoever it was that said that to me. I appreciate it, and I've taken that to heart.
Insider baseball for folks listening, for any show that comes on the Rageworks podcast network, we give them 10 episode probationary period. So it's funny that we're having this conversation, because we do that, because I know that most people quit after 10. And I'm like, listen, once you get past 10 episodes, we'll discuss, having you on the network, etc., blah, 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 because most people quit at 10. And that's usually the litmus test, because there's a level of consistency that has to be required. I mean, if you wake up every day and you have a consistent schedule, then you know what you have to do. And the thing that sticks out with what you and Prince are doing is you're preparing, you have an established relationship, you are truly, truly, truly a fan of the sport. And more importantly, you're involved in the sport to where you can speak to it as a practitioner of mixed martial arts, but also as a person who is a personality within the space. So I think that that's a big part of one thing that a lot of people that are listening to this and hoping to draw inspiration from Tim's story can get from it. Do something you like. If you like to cook, then you want to do a cooking podcast, go for it. But if you only cook once a week, I don't know if you want to sit here and talk about cooking 4 times a month if you're doing a weekly podcast, unless there's something you're bringing to the table that's uniquely different, like your experiences, or maybe just the fact that you're a novice in that department. Like, there has to be some sort of a connection to the content you're creating. Yeah, for sure. And I think if you're going to create a podcast and you're going to put something out there, and again, like you said, whatever it's about, just know that you have to be critical of yourself. Don't just think I'm the greatest. Yep.
And everyone's going to love me, and whatever I put out on day one is going to be the greatest product ever. No, make sure that you're willing to look at your own work, listen to it back, watch it back, do whatever, and pick it apart. Think, okay, here's the things that I have to do better. I know for myself, I try as hard as I can, Rich. I'm trying to get away from saying, I know that as I speak, and I've already caught myself doing it on this podcast, but I know that as I speak, I'll say, blah, 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 and I catch it, and I want to kill myself every time I do it, but I'm trying to perfect it. I'm trying to get that better. Your background. Sorry.
No. I was going to say that particular move. I reached a point many years ago where I'm like, there's certain cadences we have that are just part of just our language. So is one of those things where I remember getting to a point where I knew what looked like as a waveform, and I would find them all, cut them all out. And the thing about it is the sometimes just needs to be there because it's showing a little bit of you're thinking, your brain is working. If you cut it all out, it's very, very robotic. So what ends up happening for me was, I remember I did it this is maybe 5 years ago. I remember I edited a show, took all the ums out, and it was super robotic. Like, it's like, yeah, blah, 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 and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, this isn't working. So what I end up trying to do, if I'm going to catch myself saying the I'll use like a pause, because pauses are easier to edit out of a podcast. But I mean, as a New Yorker, is definitely, a crutch word for me. I find them all the time. Like, I start getting the same thing. You start seeing a waveform, like, oh, there it is. And strangely enough, I remember getting this is maybe 10 years ago, somebody messaged me and they were like, we're in the UK and we like your New York accent. And I'm like, I didn't really think I had one, but sure. And then I remember listening back and I'm like, man, there's so much like New York talk in the way I deliver it. I'm like, I guess you can figure out where I'm from then. But you have to, and this is just me telling you, it's good that you want to try and limit them, but don't focus on it too much that it kind of becomes a block. So
don't. And again, like you said, the paralysis by analysis, right? You don't want that. See, there you go.
Yep.
But you, even what you're saying now too, and that would be the second point, is critique yourself and also be open to critiquing from others.
Yep.
And if you're not getting it from other people, seek it out. Go ask people. I know one of the things that I've been trying to do is ask people, say, hey, when you've listened to the podcast, is there anything that you don't like? Is there anything that you thought didn't go well? And I seek out that because I want to improve the product. And sometimes people won't just come out and tell you what's wrong with it. I mean, of course, because a lot of your viewers at the beginning are going to be your friends. They're going to be your friends, your family, people that are trying to support you from the get-go. And those people may not think like, hey, I should go tell Tim that he says cool a lot, but I want that. I want you to come and say that. So seek out those things, look for things. And also the last thing I would say is don't settle. We had our logo that we created and we worked with 2 or 3 different designers over the time to kind of get it to where we wanted. And I'll tell you, halfway through the process, there was a point where Prince and I were just like, yeah, fine, let's just take this logo. The guy obviously doesn't understand what we mean by making it more neon, or whatever the thing was.
Yep.
Because we were having a hard time with designers getting them to figure out what our idea was. And when we would give them feedback on where we wanted tweaks, sometimes it just wasn't coming back how we wanted. And we were getting defeated to the point where we were like, forget it. Let's just take the logo how it is and we'll just use it, But thankfully we said, no, we're just going to keep driving success. And if we've got to change designers again, let's change designers again. And so I would also say that to people, look to change, look to improve, and don't settle. If you're not happy with something, hey, this is your product that you're putting out into the world. This is your image that you're putting out into the world. And if you want to do it and you want to look good, don't settle for something. Do it till you feel like it's good. And when it gets good, you're going to feel much better about yourself. And I think the public or your viewers or your fans, they're going to be much more appreciative that you've taken the time to do something that you can be proud of yourself.
When you've recorded your shows and you've put them out into the void, so to speak, I know you said you like to go back, listen to it, see if there were any shortcomings, etc. But have you reached a point where, let's say you finished the show and you're kind of just having your post-show wrap up with your co-host and you say to yourself, man, this show was a banger. Like, this one was good. And that in your heart of hearts, because I say this because sometimes, like you were saying before, you romanticize what you do to the point that you see no flaws. But I kind of want to explore that because, again, not some days it's a home run, some days it's a base hit, some days it's a strike,
Yeah. I appreciate Prince so much as being my co-host, because for anybody who watches the podcast, I think they do appreciate that we have a good dynamic. I'm more the straight guy. I'm more the dry wit kind of guy. And Prince is the crazy off the wall guy.
Yep.
He's constant ball of energy. You know, I'll just go on a quick side story. We went out to help promote a girl in a town close to us. She was putting on a fundraiser for the Indigenous community. And she was just doing this out of the goodness of her heart. She was doing a boot camp. It was going to be outside on a weekend, and she was trying to raise awareness and raise money. We did a very quick podcast for her because she was a friend of a friend, actually a former guest. And we put out a little episode to help her publicize it. We went out there that day to kind of join the boot camp and support her. We didn't know anybody there. It was probably about 30 people or so. Within 2 minutes of the boot camp, Prince has no idea who any of these people are. He's out there screaming, "When I say hard work, you say dedication, hard work." And little by little, the rest of the people started screaming, "Dedication." And they were like in it. And that's just the kind of guy Prince is. You know, he's just a ball of energy and a social butterfly, or whatever you want to call it. At the end of a podcast, Prince is always so positive, man. He's always like, "This was great. I'm feeling good," and blah, blah. For me, I'm always nervous. I'm always thinking like, did that come across well? I feel like that went slow. I don't know, you know? And I think they say that the human brain can process like, 5 times the amount of information than we can speak at any given time. I feel when I'm doing the podcast that I am analyzing everything as I'm going and feeling like there's a bunch of pauses, or I'm feeling that there's a bunch of lags. Then when I listen to it back, I'm like, oh man, there wasn't. Oh, it went well. So normally I'm pleasantly surprised at the way it went because I'm probably harder on myself internally.
Absolutely.
That said, there are those certain times or guests that will come on that I just feel so pumped and energized after they come on that I feel like, wow, that went really well. That guest was really engaging. They engaged with us well. The stories went well. The flow was good. There are times where I'll come up out of my studio and I'll go over to my wife and I'll say, "Hun, nailed it. This was a good one." You know, I will feel good about certain ones, but probably more often I'm kind of a little bit hesitant, and I always have to watch it back to see how it went.
What have you felt has been, I don't want to say awkward, but more uncomfortable in the last 26 episodes you've done as a podcaster for yourself?
I think, I don't know if this is what you're getting at, or if this counts as an answer, but the uncomfortableness is never knowing if a guest is going to show up.
That's a good one.
We get, we're surprised the guests that we get. Like, we had on Mark Bowden, who you're a LinkedIn personality, so I'm sure you might know who Mark Bowden is. He's the world's #1 body language expert.
Yes, I've seen his stuff. People share his stuff often. All
the time. Yeah. And he was a TED Talk guy. His TED Talk went massively viral. He's based out of Toronto. He's an Englishman, I believe. And we reached out to him because he's just such an interesting guy. And he agreed to come on. And this was very early on. And I was like, really? Like, he's going to come on, And we were dealing with his management and all that. And so we're sitting there on the day of the podcast and we're waiting for him to sign on. Frankly, I don't even know if it's the real Mark Bowden that's going to come on, right? It could be another Mark C. Bowden, some guy from, Sarnia, Ontario. I don't know. But we're sitting there and we're waiting for him. And then he pops in. And I'll tell you, the anxiety before the guest actually joins every podcast is, it is a tough one, because you arrange your time around the podcast. You've set the time for yourself and your co-host, and you've got everything ready. And we release every Friday. So, I mean, if the guest doesn't come and we record on the Wednesday, we're kind of in a bind, right? Like, you'd either have to go with no guest, or you'd have to pivot really quickly and try to find someone to come on. So I think in terms of difficulty, that is the most stressful thing. And it happens to me every week, because we have a guest every week. And every week, I'll tell you, right before that time hits, I'm stressing out thinking, okay, if this guy doesn't come out, what are we going to do? And how are we going to change? Now, to that end, just to give people an idea of what you can do, we've recorded one full episode that is, how will I say, timeless. Like, it doesn't talk about a certain fighting event, or it doesn't talk about anything specific to the time. And we've put that one in the can, and we're ready to release that on a time when something were to happen. You know, maybe one of us was sick and we couldn't do a podcast. We've got one that we can kind of put as a backup, and we'll probably do that once we use that one up.
That is a very unique but very, very great actionable piece of advice. I think having yourself covered in case something goes sideways. Maybe you want to have like you just said, like a free flowing episode, something timeless. I like that. Timeless, evergreen. Those are always great pieces to have. I really like that. And I like the fact that you acknowledge the challenge of the guest, which leads me to what I wanted to ask before we get into some of the more technical side of your podcast is how do you pitch? How do you feel your pitches are successful with guests? Are you using more traditional outreach like email, going through their management, or do you feel that social media has made it infinitely easier to connect with more people? Because sometimes people talk about getting guests and using social media, and they hate the reliance on it because it almost feels like you're stalking the person, and you got to be like, hey, are you coming on this week? Blah, 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 versus a more traditional, hey, here's the email, here's everything, I'll book you on my guest calendar, etc.
You mean once they've said yes, you mean?
No, I mean when you're pitching in general. Yeah, when you're trying to get them.
Yeah, you're going to feel like a creepo.
Yep.
That's for sure. I mean, I don't know how you're supposed to find, if anyone wants to tell me this, that would be great. I don't know how you're supposed to find people's management and how you're supposed to get in touch with them. I just know I see these people on Instagram, I see them on LinkedIn, I see them on Facebook, whatever, and I'm reaching out through them that way. I will say, reaching out through direct messages or DMs, as the cool kids say, Rich. If you're reaching them out to that way, the difficulty is that they will not see the message, because as you know, if it's someone that you're not friends with or that you're not following, that message goes into that weird little request binder.
Yep.
And unless they click in and unless they care to see, and again, depending on the people you're talking to, I mean, if you're talking to, or if you're trying to get, Brad Pitt and he's got 20 million followers, well, where do you think your message is going to fall in that? Right. So, that is a difficult pathway to take, although it can work. People can see it. I would say the other thing that I have found slightly more successful is by commenting on their posts or leaving a positive comment or a message on their post. Oftentimes when they leave or create content or create a post, you'll see the people that like to engage back when fans or viewers leave a comment, right? Like they'll say, oh, great fight. And then that fighter will go back onto that comment and say, hey, thanks for watching. At that point, you're like, oh, okay, this person's actually looking at what happens. And we have found some success in looking for guests that way, where we'll post something positive there and leave a little thing like, hey, we would love to have you on the podcast. And sometimes that actually garners some positive results. So, not to sell out my own secret, Rich, but that's found us some good guests, because people will see that and then they'll say, hey, okay, yeah, cool. The other thing, not going to lie, it's kind of a little bit of self-promotion, because anybody else that's looking at that goes, oh, this guy wants them on their podcast. Oh, that means they have a podcast?
Yep.
Let me go check that out. So It's kind of a twofer. You'll get potentially a guest and potentially you'll get some new viewers.
I like that approach. I think that one of the toughest things, and I'll answer your management question, reaching out. What ends up happening is, especially sometimes, and this is just from doing it for so long. Like I remember I used to watch fights, and after the fight's over, the guy's standing in there with his corner men, and sometimes they'll have their management in there, like Sucker Punch Entertainment is one.
Yes.
You kind of start seeing certain faces, and you're like. And then if you're following the fighter on social, you'll see them tag like maybe their manager, etc. And like
sometimes in their profile they'll have it too.
Yeah, exactly. Like you'll see like Malkikawa, whoever, and next thing you know, you start following those guys, and then you're like, oh, that guy represents this guy, that guy represents that guy, and then that's usually kind of like the backdoor way of trying to get some of those fighters. I remember years ago, I spoke to Pat Barry, and
Nice.
Pat Barry trained with Brock Lesnar, and, you know, obviously a wrestling fan, and we were covering a wrestling podcast, but I also like Pat Barry. I thought Pat Barry was awesome. So it kind of just worked out that we kind of brought him on to have a conversation. But, you know, same approach you did, engaging on social media, talking about different things. Next thing you know, hey, you know, I'd love to have you on the podcast. All right, here's my email this person. And that ends up how it goes. But one thing, and I'll share it with everybody, is if you're looking to get fighters or people in the space and they happen to do TV or film, one of the best investments you can make is an IMDb Pro account. Because if you sign up for IMDb Pro, you can see their management, their contact information for their management. And it's a good investment if you're trying to get a fighter who might have just been in, you know, straight to video movie or popped up in a commercial, because what happens is they end up sometimes setting up on IMDb, and before you know it, you reach out to their management. Sometimes it's not updated in a timely fashion, but sometimes a phone call to that management's office doesn't hurt, and you can secure guests that way. So there you go. That answers that question. An IMDb Pro investment. And sometimes they'll do trials. Hey, we'll give you, especially if you're a heavy IMDb user, because I'm a film junkie. So I'll go in there, read stuff and trivia, etc. And they'll be like, hey, have you signed up for IMDb Pro? We'll give you 3 months free. And then you sign up for the 3 months and you copy and paste every contact possible into Excel or Notion or whatever preparation tool you have. And you keep that Rolodex for the future.
That's awesome. That is great advice, man.
There you go.
We'll definitely be doing that. Yeah.
Yep. So definitely do that, especially because you and I both know a lot of MMA fighters end up being extras in movies, you know, like Keith Jardine.
Yeah, he's huge.
You know,
crazy. We just talked about that guy. And if you look at his Wikipedia, it now says Keith, the Dean of Mean Jardine,
yep,
is an actor.
Yep.
And former MMA fighter. I mean, actor has now surpassed his MMA background. It's crazy. So some people make a fantastic transition and a successful transition.
Well, you know what the funny thing is, like, and you know, we'll go off topic a bit, is the fact that a lot of these guys, they're perfectly content, you know, being the henchman, being the heavy, you know, being the guy, being the final boss in the game, so to speak. So like, yeah. Keith Jardine was always that guy. Like whenever he'd pop up in a show, it'd be like, oh, you go into the bar. Oh, here he is, you know, or there's a motorcycle gang and they're causing trouble and he's the last guy that pops out and you got, you know, the hero has to fight him. So it's always amusing when I see him. I'm like, oh, there he is.
Yeah. Someone's going to take a half beating.
Yeah, exactly. And that's yep. And that's always how it goes. I mean, you know, Randy Couture was different because Randy Couture used his name and he kind of was always like a lead. But when you look at some of these other guys, I remember I saw Blood and Bone with Michael Jai White, and who did he fight? Kimbo Slice, you know?
Oh, baby. One of the greatest.
Yeah, you know, so.
And there are fighters that you think, wow, they should be making a transition into movies and stuff, and they could be a star. I know the one I am looking for, and the one that I'm waiting for that's going to break through is the karate hottie Michelle Watterson. She has such a great personality, like on her TikTok or whatever, on her Instagram or whatever it is. She's got such a great personality. She's got the look. She has the vocal cords, right? Like she speaks, she's an articulate speaker. She speaks well. She's intelligent. I totally see her as being able to make that transition. And I think I've noticed that just recently she's now got some acting role in something that she's promoting.
Yep.
And I'm telling you, you watch out for her. I think she's going to be the next thing.
Well, you know,
going to make it.
That's also a product, and you can attest to this. This is also a product of the machine, meaning what I used to tell people all the time, like somebody can be loved by the fans, but if the machine doesn't believe in them or doesn't kind of navigate the chess pieces to help them get a clear path, they never get to that next level. A great example, and again, people are gonna be like, oh man, these guys are going down the rabbit hole, is I always say Chris Weidman. Chris Weidman has an amazing story. He won the belt. He was a champion. And when he was a champion, the UFC didn't go and leverage all of that just genuinely nice guy story to help him get to the next level. They're like, oh, he won the belt from Anderson Silva. And, but they never really like invested energy in him like they did in Conor, or they did in Ronda, or they did in some of these other fighters, because they were, whether it was because Weidman just wasn't that fighter or not. But I definitely feel that he was always a guy who had a genuinely good story. He was a genuinely nice guy. And I always say Chris Weidman lays in bed awake at night knowing that he beat the greatest fighter in the world twice through freak incidents, like as a human being. And I say this just, again, it's us talking MMA briefly, is the fact that as a fighter, that would keep me up at night. Like, damn, if Anderson Silva wasn't showboating that night, could I have taken him out for real?
Yeah, I think the fighters have to believe in themselves. I mean, to get to the point where these guys are, they have to have such high belief in themselves and their abilities and their skills. The worst thing is probably when you win by some sort of freak accident or something like that. Most recently, you had Uriah Hall beating the aforementioned Chris Weidman by way of the exact same leg break.
Exactly.
And at the end of that fight, you saw Uriah Hall break down and cry in the ring, because you think, okay, I just won, but what did this really mean? And all my preparation to come out and show my skills and my talents, and I wasn't able to do it. And it's so disheartening. Yep. But I think after time, you have to just think, okay, but I was there. I am that guy, and I'm able to do it.
Oh, absolutely. And that was exactly it. For those listening, that little MMA nugget is one of the reasons why you should definitely check out Tim's Fight Insight podcast. But in all seriousness, just as a human being, there's always some things I tell like people I know about, like non-negotiables. And, one of those things is that, you're just like, yeah, you're not gonna diminish what you've done. But I will say that internally, like you said, like you're always nervous when you finish your show and all of these things. It's just one of those things that I'm sure I feel bothers him in some capacity, but it's but it's going to be something that he'll always probably just brush off like, yeah, things happen, blah, blah, blah. We can't really go back and change it. He's going to definitely be very, very positive about it. But again, it's just one of those things that I'm like, it has to just hide inside your soul. You're like, damn, man, if he wouldn't have broke his leg, like how would that have gone? Just because. And I think that it's always one of those, Marvel just came out with their animated series, What If? And it's like, and it's exactly that. It's like, what if Anderson Silva wasn't showboating that night and actually took you seriously? Like, how would that fight have gone? Or what if he wouldn't have checked that kick the way he did? Like, how would that have gone? And it's just amazing. And I use Weidman as an example because like I said, he had an amazing story. He was just a genuinely good human being, a great ambassador for the sport. And I feel the UFC just kind of was like, yeah, he's our champ.
For the fellow nerds listening to this podcast, there is a timeline somewhere that the TVA is watching where Chris Weidman beat Anderson Silva and was the greatest champion in the world forever. Became president of the United States. Right? There's a what if episode just waiting to be made.
Well, think about it. I mean, GSP kind of alluded to it when he lost to Matt Serra. That one time, he's always like, oh, whenever they bring it up, you see he's like, oh, he kind of just, he'll talk about it, but he's just like, man, if I wouldn't have messed around that night, so there's your little MMA and nerdy knowledge for you guys. To get things back on course, I wanted to, we've discussed your preparation, we've discussed the equipment, we know you used the Blue Yeti. And, you use some ring lights, you got your graphics done. One thing I did want to discuss before we move to the next segment is in terms of getting your podcast out there, because we connected in a podcasting group. What has been something that you've learned in the last 3 months that has helped you better promote or grow your show so far?
I don't want to tell me if this is a bad answer. Okay. Like, be honest with me, because
Sure.
I am not the greatest at tech and stuff like that. Oftentimes my wife will, laugh at my inability to do something as simple as tag something or figure out how to do something on Instagram. But using Reels in Instagram seems to me to be hitting a much greater number of people than any of my stories or posts were hitting, including getting engagement back. So if you don't know, posting on a reel, you're able to also make the clips much longer. And for some reason, using hashtags or whatever it is seems to be hitting, I would say probably at least quadruple what my normal posts were getting in engagement. And so since I've been doing that, we've been seeing some good success. And in terms of for your Instagram, it also not just will be in your reel section, but you can also click it to make sure that it shows up on your regular feed as well. So, if you want to look at your page and it looks all nice, it is in there as well. You do have to do some editing to make sure that the graphics don't go too high or too low on the screen so that when you're seeing it in your little boxes, it looks nice and centered and you can kind of play with that. But I would say that that's been helping me get things out a little bit better. And I'm trying to do them consistent amongst themselves. But what I'll do is I'll change the background coloring for each episode. So right now I'm doing as we're speaking now, the episode that I'm promoting is episode 26. It's with legendary ring announcer Joe A. Martinez. With his, I have it on a blue background. With the guest prior to that, I think it was red or black. And so then when you look at my profile as well, you'll kind of see the episodes almost color coded. And I feel like that's a nice way for people to kind of understand the flow of our page and what we're doing. So then when they see a new color, they'll be like, oh, that's a new guest. Let me take a look at that one.
Yeah, you've unlocked. It's funny, and I'll share this in general. You've unlocked what I like to call the Instagram cheat code. And the thing about Instagram, and I like that you actually use that to promote a podcast, because too many people sometimes spread themselves too thin, and they put all their breadcrumbs in different places, and it's good to a point because you want to have a presence, but you never become a master in one of those disciplines. Kind of like with MMA, you can learn all of the different facets, and be well rounded, but you got to have one that's your bread and butter. And with Instagram, you've like I said, you've unlocked the cheat code, because with Instagram wants you to stay within Instagram. And that's the way you're going to grow Instagram. It's like I tell people with stories. I'm like, you know what you do? You do a bunch of hashtags, you put them on the story first with text, then you paste your image over the hashtags, because then it's going to get the hashtags in front of people who consume that kind of content. And again, right. It's one of those things where, it's kind of like a machine gun, like you're going to spray a bunch of bullets and some of them are going to hit and some of them aren't. But you're motivating people to stay on the platform. And that's one of the things with Reels, especially with a lot of the algorithm shifts, that it's become such a great success for many people. And I'm glad it's becoming successful for you, because again, they want that. They want you to stay in that sandbox. So everything that you're using to keep people in that sandbox is working in your favor. So if you went and you did a post and then a story and then a reel, you've hit the trifecta, and it's going to hit, and Instagram's just going to they're going to be like, oh, these guys at Fight Insight know what they're doing. They like being in our house, Yeah.
And I think, shout out to the groups that I'm in as well. There's been a community of like-minded individuals. So for me, it's MMA, but for whoever's listening to this podcast, there's going to be groups out there, whether it's comics or movies or anime or whatever it is that you're into, food, cars, whatever. There's groups that now I'm kind of a part of, and it's like chat groups in Instagram. And so what it is it's a bunch of for these chat groups, it's a bunch of like-minded pages or Instagram page owners that have formed these groups to help support and engage one another's posts.
Yep.
So I'm in a few of them, and they're quite large. But what happens is every time we have a post or something, we share it amongst the group and say, hey, can you like, comment, save it? And we're trying to hit, like you're saying, on those algorithms that whatever it is that Instagram's doing to help you pump and promote things out. And so as a group, we're saying, okay, let's all like it. Let's all comment on each other's posts. Let's all save the posts. And that way we're trying to get that engagement in the posts and the things up. And so, and it's also just about being a good person, man. If there's another page that you like, well, then share their stuff, share their stories and whatever, because people that look at your page don't necessarily only want to see your stuff. Obviously, these users are following tons of other pages. So if you can also show them, hey, here's another cool page. Hey, here's some cool content on another page. People appreciate that too. And they're also more likely to then look at everything that you post because they know that, hey, it's not always just Fight and Sight, promoting their podcast. Sometimes they show us other stuff, or they show us other pages or other contests. Those are the kind of things that you want to do to kind of keep that group engaged.
There you go. Last question before we move on. How are you, if you're using StreamYard and you're doing all your video, how are you editing your audio? What's your editing process like?
Oh boy, I think you're going to need to edit this answer out, Branches. I'm only using iMovie.
Nothing wrong with that.
Like I said, I am not great at this. If this bloody pandemic would end, especially I'm in Toronto, Rich, so we've been shut down massively. Like we're just able to eat at a restaurant now, when the rest of the world seemingly has been able to do that for quite some time. I would love to be able to go into the Apple store and use their people to kind of teach me some more things with iMovie, but I'm using simple iMovie. I'm editing through there. That's the way. If I have to edit out an audio clip or anything like that, then I do it there. If I need to extract just an audio file, I'll do it from there. Now, StreamYard, for those that don't know, it's a web-based platform. It does give me the ability, once I've recorded something, I can download just the MP3 file or the MP4 file. So I'm able to get my audio straight from there, which I can then, put into Anchor or wherever you want to put your audio podcast. And with iMovie, though, I can edit out the clips that I want. And if I wanted just an audio file, I can sort that out through there. That's what I know. I apologize. I'm probably a lot better at creating a website in HTML than I am on editing my audio.
I actually like that answer, and I'll tell you why. A lot of people get hung up on that, and you always got to going back to what I was saying about, where your bread and butter is. So in this instance, if you use iMovie, like I edited podcasts for years with just Audacity, which is free. And it's such a robust tool, and it's a robust tool for being free, that it's insane that more and more people are sometimes just now finding out about it, and they've been podcasting for years. And I'll tell them, they're like, hey man, how do you get the audio to sound so clear with like you were saying, dead spaces? I'm like, I just go in here, I select this thing called truncate silence, and it removes all the dead spaces. And they're like, are you kidding me? And I'm like, nope, that's it. Or how do you level it out? I'm like, listen, I'll use Levelator, which isn't supported anymore. Drop the file in there. It levels it all out to one listening standard, or, I'll pay for Auphonic, which does the same thing. And but again, I didn't get to that stage overnight, like Auphonic, I ended up paying, I think it's like $90, but Levelator was free, and Levelator's still pretty good. So I built a lot of the content just exactly that, using the free stuff. And Apple is one of those companies that gives you an amazing suite of free tools to get your stuff out there. So the fact that you're using iMovie is 100%, I'm on board with that, because going back to what we were saying at the start, too many people get hung up on, I don't have the right software. I'm like, do you realize how much free crap is out there that you can use?
Yeah, scroll your finger one screen to the right. You already have it, buddy. It's right there.
Yep.
Like just click on it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it. And to hear you say, oh, I just use iMovie and it's all I use and it's not something I'm well versed in. That's the answer I wanted because it's inspirational for anybody who has that hang up. Oh, I don't have the right equipment. I'm like, listen, Audacity is free. iMovie, if you got a Mac, it's there. Just watch a couple of YouTube videos, and you'll get yourself up and running.
Yeah. And you know what? And like you said, you're not going to know the problems that you're going to face until you start to face the problems.
Yep.
And when you do, you will find the solution. And, having a network of friends or like-minded individuals such as ourselves, or, we said that we found each other on a LinkedIn group, reaching out, finding other people, that's where you're going to get the help. Of course, YouTube as well, like you said, but there's nothing like being able to just talk or chat with someone
Hell yeah.
in real time and just say, hey, how can I help this? How can I do this? I've had some great people helping me. Like I said, the other pages on Instagram, those people have helped, when it came to those reels and things like that. But the guy that I said that I was going to do the podcast with in the beginning, he's helped out a few times. I have another guy that trained at the gym who runs a recording studio. He's helped out a few times when I've had some glitches. So
there you go.
You leverage your network of friends, leverage your network of connections, and there's always someone willing and ready to help.
There you go. All right. So that's actually a great way to segue into our next segment, which is we call the hot seat. It's just a series of rapid fire questions based on some of the stuff we discussed, some of the stuff you're into, etc. And we, right off the cuff, there's nothing super crazy with regards to how you answer. There's no right or wrong way to do it, All right. So what are 3 mobile apps you can't live without?
I will go with Instagram. I will go with UFC Fight Pass, and I will go with, I don't know. I got to go with Netflix.
So it's interesting you bring up UFC Fight Pass, and I'm kind of glad you did because I want to ask, does it aggravate you the fact that you pay for a subscription that doesn't give you the fights?
Yeah, I've been a subscriber of UFC. I've been a subscriber of UFC Fight Pass from, I think, day one. I got a free Google Chromecast out of it when I subscribed, so that was pretty cool. I'm in Canada, so in the US, I think you guys have like your programs on ESPN or whatever, and they're kind of easier to get. In Canada, sometimes the fights are on channels I don't subscribe to, or there's something weird. So for me, it was a way that I could get them all. If I wasn't watching them live, they kind of show up immediately right after. So yeah, I'll tell you, that app, whoever's managing it or working it, is not doing a good job. That thing, every update, it seems to get almost more difficult to find fights than it was before.
Mm-hmm.
But for what I do, for my love of the sport, and specifically now for the podcast, for me to be able to go back and watch fights so that I can do some research, I appreciate it for what it is. And hey, if anybody from UFC is listening, I love you guys. Please give me a job.
I'll tell you why I asked that. I asked it because, as someone who is a wrestling fan also, the WWE network, before it got moved over to Peacock, which is just an abysmal platform for WWE content. The WWE network, you paid your subscription fee, and one of the selling point was you'd get the pay-per-views. So when you think about it, buying a pay-per-view was $60 a month, and you pay $60 a month for each pay-per-view. In the span of 2 pay-per-views, you spend the equivalent of what it would have for a year of subscribing to the network. So I used to say, hey, if I only watch the big 4, SummerSlam, Royal Rumble, Mania, and Survivor Series, I was ahead of the curve. And that was always a big draw. The fact that I could go and watch the pay-per-view as part of the package. And that, let me tell you, when they announced UFC Fight Pass, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I'll pay for the service. I'll be able to watch the pay-per-views. And then pay-per-views. Yeah. And Dana was like, no, you got to still pay for the pay-per-views. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. I don't know how
angered me to know. I would have paid more. I would have paid $15 a month or $20 a month if you would have said, hey, you get all the pay-per-views, all the fight nights, everything, boom, right in the service. You would have got my money.
Yeah, I think the problem is I don't have any idea how WWE was able to work off a model like that in terms of the financial, because like you said, the amount of money that they were losing from hardcore fans that switched from ordering every pay-per-view to instead just paying for the app. I don't understand how that financial gap would have been compensated for. I think in UFC too, the biggest problem, and I mean, I'm a huge UFC fan, train in martial art gym. I think I'm the only guy in my gym that pays for UFC Fight Pass. I think they have a real hard time getting people to buy into products and things like that. I mean, one of the things we often talk about is fighter pay and stuff like that, which is a hot topic. I don't want to go on that, but how many people actually own a UFC t-shirt? Like, how many people buy things? So I think UFC doesn't have the engagement from their fans probably that would allow them to put out an app like that.
Okay, I can answer that. I can answer that, and I'll keep it brief. As someone who has a closet full of MMA fighter affliction t-shirts that now are gym shirts, I can genuinely say that the reason UFC fans the reason UFC doesn't sell UFC shirts is because and I'll say it's like, because they're bullshit. It's just like the most blandest, plainest, whatever shirt. Like, I remember I have a shirt, and everybody always talks about it. It was I think Extreme Couture put it out. It was a Rampage shirt. Rampage, one of my favorite fighters. It had like two wolf heads and a bunch of chains on it. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, looking back on it, I'm like, wow, I wore this in public. But still, like, I wear it to the gym, and people are like, yo, that Rampage is awesome. Or they'll be like, hey, remember when he, slammed this dude on his head? And it just brings up that conversation. But the thing about it was that the shirts got, they looked, don't get me wrong, they look cool at the time. Like I found I had a shirt for, you remember Sean Shirk, the Muscle Shark?
Muscle Shark,
yeah, I have like his affliction shirt, and people are like, oh man, whatever happened to that guy? Like, these are the kind of there's a guest for a future podcast.
I don't know. I think I am speaking to an anomaly here. Someone who actually bought a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Overall, I don't. I just think people don't. So that might be the problem.
Well, it's exactly that, because if you think about it, when you buy a basketball jersey or a football jersey or whatever sport, you buy it for the player. And yeah, don't get me wrong, it's a uniform, so you buy it, and that's just part of it because it's a team sport. But MMA is not a team sport. And the UFC is like, oh, we're going to do this fighter kit and blah, blah, blah. Like, no. Like, if you make a Conor McGregor shirt with like the fighting Irishman from Notre Dame that looks like Conor McGregor, like, people will eat that up. I mean, obviously that people have done that, and I've seen it on Etsy, and I've seen it in different places. But what I'm saying is, like, people, they resonate with that kind of stuff because it's kind of kitschy and funny. That's why so many Marvel t-shirts and like pop culture t-shirts, sometimes you see so many of them. Like, I see a 42-year-old guy with a Rick and Morty t-shirt, because they love it. But it's also like the design kind of resonates. It's kind of cool. It gets people talking. I mean, I bought a, we're talking TVA. I bought a Loki tank top for my trip to Florida that said variant on it. I'm like, man, wearing this during the coronavirus variant may not be the best thing. But I remember going into one of the stores and somebody's like, yo, that's a cool tank top. And I'm like, thanks, but that's what I mean. Like, the UFC just never went out of their way to make the stuff cool.
No. And I think that's why it's difficult for them to be able to offer something like a WWE app.
Yep.
Where you're going to get everything. Cause I think they just don't have that money.
No, they had like the WEC stuff. And like I said, they had me when they started doing like some of this other stuff. But when it's like, hey, you want to pay to watch The Ultimate Fighter? I'm like, no, the hell I don't. What's your favorite piece of tech besides your phone and your computer?
My Nintendo Switch.
Nice. What are you playing?
Right now, I am dominating Pokemon Unite players. That's a new free game that came out. I'm enjoying that. And I will give a shout out to Oxenfree. That is a game that if people have not played that, go pick up Oxenfree. Amazing game. And the sequel is coming out soon.
Nice. What made you want to buy the Switch over any other console?
I think it was the dual function, right? Being your TV system and then having it being mobile. I mean, I'm a 44-year-old man. I don't have the time and luxury to be able to just sit in front of a TV all day long. And if my wife wants to watch something or we want to watch TV, right? I don't want to hide away in a basement somewhere. So being able to then undock it and play it free like that was pretty cool. It's a cool thing.
Nice. What was the last business book you read?
Last business book I read.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this counts, but I'll say there's a book that I've enjoyed, and I just read it for the second time, which is called The Tao of Pooh, or The Tay of Pooh, Tao.
Mm-hmm. The Tao. Go ahead.
It teaches Taoist principles through Winnie the Pooh stories.
Nice.
And I'll tell you, it is a massive bestseller. If you walk into your bookstore, I'm telling you, it's going to be hard to find because they always sell it. This book continually sells out, but is really well written for anyone that grew up, back in the time when Winnie the Pooh was a thing, which pretty much, I guess, is everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It teaches Taoist principles, and it's not a religious book or anything like that, but it teaches about kind of like just how to be a good person and how to look at life in a positive way and how to look at the good things in life. So when you say like business, it's all kind of like that, right? Because it's about your life mentality and the way that, like, the outlook that you have on life. And it teaches it in a really good way. You're not going to convert religion or anything like that. Like, it's nothing about that. So don't think that. But it's a good book. It's a really good read. It's a quick read.
I never would have thought talking to an MMA enthusiast and a podcaster that Winnie the Pooh would be in our conversation. This is why I love doing this stuff. And
I just lost like 10 subscribers. How did that happen?
Well, no, I like that. I like that. And I'll tell you why, because what you just said about those principles, sometimes I feel like our ideologies would be better suited for consumption if they were wrapped in things we enjoy. And I say this because, as a father now, I remember when I was a kid, they'd be like, oh, here's, kid stories from the Bible. And I'd be like, right. Okay, how are you going to kind of take, like, for instance, like the crucifixion and put that into a kid's story, So it's interesting that you kind of take that and you turn it into this, Eminem, Willy Wonka version of events to kind of help people process it. But you know what the crazy part is? Sometimes we need that. If you think about it, when you look at a character like Winnie the Pooh, that's as wholesome as it gets. The messages that are there are positive, and especially now, and you can relate to this, seeing social media, everything's a meme. Like when everybody was using the Arthur closed fist meme, and I said to myself, I'm like, man, I watched Arthur as a kid, and now this thing's a meme. Like it's just, it's amusing to me to see that, and I feel that if more stuff was done in such a way that, not to oversimplify, but just to make it more approachable, people would be better off. So I genuinely like this recommendation. It's funny because I saw a book. It was like, I think it was Life Advice from Skeletor from He-Man. And
yep, there's things like that.
Yeah, and I just thought, I'm like, man, I need to buy this because it's just so absurd. But I like that, and I like the fact that, like you said, it's like, listen, it's not trying to turn any sort of religious values or anything. It's just genuinely wholesome stuff. And I think that when we do business, whether it's podcasting or our day-to-day business, like, just being a better human being makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice. What's the last TV show you watched, especially since you've been home for the pandemic?
Oh man. I will say, obviously, anything that's Marvel, I'm gobbling that stuff up.
Yep.
But to completion, I will say Bad Batch.
Nice.
Incredible. Holy moly, that was great. I just finished season. You're talking about Peacock, which is funny. We don't have that in Canada. So I just came across a show in Canadian Netflix called AP Bio. Finished 2 seasons of that. That is fantastic. And for anybody that wants a real outside the box pick, I do watch a lot of Korean dramas. And I'll say I'm watching a show now called Law School, which is a Korean drama show, which is pretty good. And if we want to tie it maybe a little bit back into kind of like the science fiction stuff, I would say there's a Korean drama called Sisyphus, Sisyphus. It's a Greek god, but that was a pretty cool Korean drama show that I watched. Sci-fi.
Nice. Yeah, you can find links to as much of that as possible in the show notes for this episode, folks. We talk about tech, so we always got to talk about toys to a point, especially as a comic book and pop culture fan. What were some of the toys you had growing up?
Oh, toys I had growing up. Well, if you watch my podcast, you'll see in my background, I often put a bunch of my toys and Legos, and I've got comics displayed on in frames and stuff like that. But I was a huge Transformers guy, for sure. Huge Transformers guy. Still have a bunch of it, and Lego. Have a ton of Lego still from when I was a kid. I'll tell you one thing that I always kept, and I don't know why I did, but was the Beast. Oh man, now I'm gonna mess it up. But it was those little animals that had weapons like swords and stuff like that. And if you pressed on their like a little sticker, they would either be fire.
Holy crap! Those are battle beasts. Those are battle beasts. And I just had a conversation with a great friend of mine because I found one in my house from when I was a kid. It was a shark.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
I have probably about 40 or 45 of them. I remember as a kid loving that. Like, you love Transformers and G.I. Joe and all that, of course. Yep. But I remember loving Battle Beast, and I still have them in a box. And it's a box, and this is another relic, but the box is of a pencil like an electronic pencil sharpener.
Right.
So I kept it in that box, and man, for my whole life, I have kept that box. And every Battle Beast has their weapon that I got with it. Like, I kept those things mint, and I kept them forever. And I remember always meticulously making sure that I did not lose anything. So yeah, those are some of the toys I found. But yeah,
someone would pay you a lot of money for those. I mean, like I found mine, and I remember I shared it on an Instagram story on my personal Instagram, and somebody was like, "Yo, do you still have that?" I'm like, "Yeah." Like, are you selling it? I'm like, "No." But yeah, man, like
ton of Battle Beasts, and I do have as well. I have my original for those that will remember. I feel like some of the listeners of this podcast will, but I have the original Hero Quest board game with all the pieces and all that. So I still got that bad boy.
My good friend who hosts Trek Untold on the network, he actually backed the new Hero Quest that they're doing. One.
That's right. Yeah, I saw that.
So
and that looks pretty cool, but I'll tell you, it's not going to replace my good old beaten up version.
Hell no,
which is still in excellent condition. It's just the box is nicely worn.
Outstanding. What's a non-negotiable for you in business?
A non-negotiable, I guess. Wow, that's a tough one. I'd say the non-negotiable would be someone who doesn't want to improve, or someone who doesn't want to get better and see that there's always an opportunity to get better.
Nice. That's a great answer. I call you up. I go, "Hey, what's going on with the podcast a year from now? What do you hope your answer to be?"
I hope to say that we are continuing to go, that we are continuing to enjoy it. And from a more business perspective, I'm going to say that we have a sponsor or sponsors. I think that's the next big step that we really want to achieve. We want to get big enough to where we're collaborating with other partners and having sponsorship.
Outstanding. All right, that's going to wrap up the hot seat, and it's going to take us into what we like to call Reach One, Teach One, a last piece of actionable advice we like to give our listeners, whether it's business, personal, etc. I'm actually giving you a twofer. As a mixed martial artist, what do you feel is a good base for someone that's interested in pursuing the sport?
I think I would definitely look to do jujitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu as a young child. I think that is a sport that I did not do, but as I got older and I was able to do it, it's one of those things like golf. You know, if you teach your kid golf, that's going to be a sport that they can play for the rest of their lives, no matter how they get. You don't need to have. So I grew up playing soccer and tennis. And the difficulty with that was that you always had to have someone on the other side that was of equal skill to you. And at some point, you couldn't find that person, not because you're too good, maybe you're too lousy, but you always needed someone of the equal skill to enjoy it. With golf, you don't need that because you're just playing by yourself. With jujitsu, it's kind of the same thing because it's a sport that you're going to be able to do for the rest of your life. There will always be people that will engage with you. And in terms of a life skill, that's a really good one because it's about when someone grabs you. You know, if you're ever in an altercation or something like that, that's probably one of the most adaptable martial arts that will take you through life, and it gets you feeling comfortable. It will give you confidence. You know, you can do all the striking sports you want, and that's going to give you some comfort. But to know that if someone comes into close quarters and is grappling me, I'm going to have the confidence to be able to at least potentially protect myself. I think that's a great skill for children to learn, or for if you're learning something at the beginning stages of martial arts.
I'm actually very, very happy to hear that. As I said to my wife, I'm like, you know, I want my daughter to know how to swim and know how to fight. And, you know, jujitsu was one of the first things I always thought of, because especially it's one of those things where regardless of the size of your opponent or your size, there's always a way. Where there's a limb, there's a way.
That's right. Yep, definitely. And it's one of those things, especially for women and for self-defense, that is definitely the martial art that you may want to take up first.
Awesome.
And in terms of martial arts, if you're looking for martial arts, I mean, hey, look, I remember I was sparring with a guy and he was a big dude, you know, muscles on top of muscles. And it was one of his first classes in mixed martial arts. And he was a boxer. And we were sparring, and of course I'm like, okay, this guy is new, so he doesn't know his own strength. He's going to kill me.
Yep.
And he's a boxer. So right when we started to spar, I got in close with him and took him down. And it was the funny thing. I mean, we're all friendly and having a good time. But as he's being taken down to the mat, I heard him say, "Oh no." And because he knew that he didn't know anything when it came to the ground stuff. And so as he's falling, he's like, "Oh no." And it was just, you know, he knew, hey, I don't know what to do now that I'm here. And so I think as a martial artist, if you're looking to learn, you know, that's definitely, you don't want to be in that spot. So,
yep, the ground is the great equalizer. You know, it always trips me out whenever I've watched MMA fights and I watch a guy who's so good on the ground and they decide, oh, I'm just gonna stand, like Rampage, one of my favorite fighters. I'm like, dude, when did you decide that you wanted to box everybody? I'm like, you are known for dropping people on their head, and you're so quick in that discipline that you haven't dropped a dude on his head in forever. And I remember I used to get so mad because, you know, he'd get locked in like a clinch with somebody. I'm like, why are you not high crotch and slamming this dude on his dome right now? Like, you're really trying to box. It used to infuriate me so much as a fan, you know?
He's got to show that he can do it.
And that's great, but you know what happens when you want to show you can do it? Show when you know you can do it when you're winning.
Yeah, sure.
You know, you don't see Alistair Overeem coming around here trying to do BJJ. You know, if he gets to the ground, he's got like a decent base, but he knows where his strengths are.
Yeah, infuriating for the fans.
Oh man, to no end. The second question. You are asked to present to a group of middle school kids. And as somebody who has a background in web development and, you know, creating websites and also now creating internet content, what's one piece of advice you'd give them if they wanted to pursue a career in either of those spaces?
Sorry, in either of which spaces?
In either, you know, web design or content creation.
I think I'm going to go back and use the words of advice that I received from who we spoke about before, my great guest, Ashley Evans Smith. She said, closed mouths don't get fed. And we were talking about her podcast and our podcast and about, how to grow it and stuff. And that was the piece of advice that said got her moving, and that I have taken forward ever since hearing that, which is, and if you don't understand what that means, it means ask people for help, ask people for advice, ask people for stuff, right? When it comes to, wanting guests and things like that, ask people to be on. Don't be afraid to ask for things. And if you don't ask, don't expect things to come to you. And I hope that kind of applies to both things that you were saying there. But
absolutely,
it's just in life, right? If you don't ask for things, things aren't going to happen. And I'm not saying go beg for things. I'm not saying be ridiculous in what you ask for, but be respectful, be polite, be understanding of what you're asking for. But ask, go out there, talk to people, engage people. It doesn't have to be, if you're nervous, it doesn't have to be in person. It can be online. It can be through a DM. It can be through an email, whatever means you want, but get yourself out there and start talking to people.
Nice. I think that is a perfect way to close things out. Of course, last but not least, Tim, where can people find you, your podcast, and more importantly, how can they connect with you?
Thanks so much. I had an amazing time speaking to you. If you want to watch our podcast, we are an audio and visual podcast, so you can go find us on YouTube at Fight Insight Podcast, 3 words. You can find us on Instagram at Fight Insight Podcast. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your pods. Sites I've never even heard of. We're there. Fight Insight Podcast. If you'd like to email us, if you have any questions, if you want to be a guest on our podcast, if you have someone you want to suggest, you can email us at fightinsightpod@gmail.com.
Nice. And of course, links to all of those and the email will be in the show notes for this episode. Tim, I truly, truly appreciate you taking a little over 90 minutes to share the toys and tech of your trade.
Thank you so much.
Man, what an awesome conversation with Tim, tackling so many great things, talking a little MMA. If you're looking for a great MMA podcast, definitely check out Tim and the work that they're doing at Fight Insight Podcast. Links for it will be in the show notes for this episode, as I mentioned during our interview. And feel free to hit up Tim on social. I'll make sure to include all the social media for the podcast there as well. Lots of great guests on the horizon for future episode of Toys and Tech, for future episodes of Toys and Tech of the Trade. I think we're definitely going to try and get some of our hosts from the network back on just to catch up with them, especially because so many of them are doing such amazing work. I know some of you are really digging the Eat for Life podcast. We're going to see if we can get Marcus and Tamika and Derek on individual episodes of Toys and Tech of the Trade to showcase their work and allow you folks to get better acquainted with what they're doing. I believe they're going to be changing their release schedule. We were doing their episodes on Mondays, but I think they're going to be releasing it on a different day going forward. I know that the live streams, they do Sunday nights, but they may be moving some stuff around. So definitely keep it locked to Rageworks and the Rageworks Podcast Network for that. And of course, social media for those updates as well. Last but not least, as always, if you want to keep up with everything Rageworks related, feel free to look up Rageworks on the social media platform of your choice. We're definitely there, including Pinterest. And if you like to watch these episodes on YouTube, or you have YouTube running in the background, just look for the Rageworks Network or Rageworks in general on YouTube. Throw us a sub. We really appreciate it. You know, we're doing more toy reviews and more stuff, which I've been working on tirelessly. A huge shout to Matt from Nerd News Today for his assistance with a lot of that stuff. So new videos are going on the channel, more podcasts, more awesome stuff, more ways to give you value. As always, we truly appreciate you. Thank you for the support, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Peace. Toys and Tech of the Trade is part of the RageWorks Podcast Network, your source for rants about gaming, entertainment, and the works. Visit us at RageWorksNetwork.com.